Hello everybody. In this video I'm going to show you a game I played last night in the Central London League. I was playing against Battersea for HMRC, and in this game the time control was 75 minutes with a 15-second increment for the entire match, the entire game rather. And I was playing against someone who I've played against a couple of times before, Tommaso Penna, who is rated 174 ECF, and I think his FIDE is about 2000. So, pretty strong player. And each of the times I've played him previously, I've been losing, sometimes by quite a lot, and then have somehow managed to win in time scrambles or very tricky endgames. So the actual main sort of thing to take away from this game will actually be how to draw losing endgames. So watch out for that a bit later. Anyway, I was white and started off with c4. He played knight f6, g3, e5, bishop g2, c6. So I've encountered this a couple of times before in the last year or so. I think this is called the Keres, and it's seen as very reliable and solid for black, although rather unenterprising. Generally, black is aiming for a draw, but is not worse, is sort of, if black can make it to about move 20 without being done in tactically or having their tiny bit of piece placement issues taken advantage of, black will have a very solid pawn structure and things should be level. So I try and challenge black's setup. Black is planning to play d5 and have a strong hold in the center with the pawns. So I played d4. He took, and I took with the queen. And now the move black has been trying to play d5. So at this point, we'd played 5 moves each, and I was still on 75 minutes because I know this opening. And he was on 57 minutes because he turned up about 15 minutes late. So neither of us had used up much time when we were actually at the board. So the thing with black is that he has a good pawn chain on b7, c6, d5, which is blunting my bishop on g2 and preventing it having the whole board to stare at. But on the plus side, maybe the d5 pawn can be a target for me. And I could, if I wanted to, make it an isolated pawn on d5 by repeatedly taking until nothing's left but a pawn. But the one thing that you should notice is that c6 is, being occupied by a pawn. So black can't play knight c6. I don't want black playing knight c6. So I want to only capture on d5 when black has already moved the knight and can't then put it on c6. So I play knight c3, attacking the pawn, bishop e6, and I think the book move is actually either knight f3 or capturing on d5. I think captures is by far the most popular. However, I play bishop g5, so I'm really trying to challenge black and perhaps create some pawn structure deficits. And I thought here that bishop e7 was the best move, and then I would probably castle queenside, or maybe I'd capture on d5. However, he took on c4, and I can't capture because of the bishop on e6 that was moved just now. So where else can my queen go? Let's trade queens. I'm down on material, I may as well trade. So king takes. And here, the most popular move is actually castles queenside with check, which is always quite pretty to do, castling with check. But to be honest, I don't really like my pawn on f2 being unguarded. I prefer to castle kingside, so I play rook d1 check. Also, my king's rather open on the queen side, so also there's a pawn storm that can come up with black's pawns if I put my king on the queen side. Anyway, rook d1 check, and the thing is that if black tries to play the normal move of king c7, which is usually seen as the best square for the king, I have bishop f4 check, where the king is forced to run around a bit. So instead, king e8 is played, and it creates the optical illusion of thinking black can still castle. And at this point, I realised that all my advantage, or what's the word, compensation for the lost pawn is based on where black's pieces are and how awkward they are to coordinate. The knight can't come to c6, so that's strike one. Strike two is the king will be in the centre for the rest of the game, really, or until the very end of the game. And with lots of pieces on the board, that may allow tactical opportunities. So, for example, I was looking at moves like knight b5, aiming for knight c7. It doesn't work, but it's still good to look at. And finally, the rooks are not connected, and especially that rook on h8 is going to be very difficult to make useful, to develop. So I felt here this was good enough to play. Knight f3, bishop e7. So, okay, developing. And the reason I didn't take on f6, doubling his pawns, was I thought that rook g8 would allow the rook to develop. So instead, my plan is to give him an isolated king's pawn. And I feel that isolated pawns are much weaker than double pawns. So that's my own personal thing. So if I can do that, then I'll have the bishop pair, and his pawns will be very, very ugly. So hopefully I can win a pawn back, and then I'll be much better. So bishop d7 was played. I think actually bishop c8 is stronger, because d7 might be a good square for the black knight on b8. However, what he played is not bad. It wasn't something I'd really considered. I castled. Knight a6, which is generally seen in this kind of variation. Usually the knight is heading to b4 or even c5. So I play e4. I don't want black playing knight d5, aiming to swap off pieces and having a knight on a very good square. And the idea could also be knight b4 to d5. So he doesn't play knight b4, he plays knight c7. I actually think knight b4 was better because he could then play knight d3, an octopus knight, which would restrict my piece activity. Anyway, knight c7, and I've decided to go for broke here. I play f4. So the idea is to try and do a kingside pawn storm, open up the centre and attack the black monarch. Rook d8. Okay, good move. So perhaps bishop c8 was not such a good move because this has allowed black to develop the rook. e5. So at this point I was thinking maybe I can pawn storm, and I also saw a way to swap off to my advantage, or at least to make my position better. Knight d5, bishop takes bishop first. I want to take away his control of the dark squares. King takes. I was looking more at knight takes actually, but king takes was played. And at this point, Yeah, at this point, I had 66 minutes left. He only had half an hour. So this is only move 16 now. And I thought that perhaps I could use this time advantage to my benefit. If I could calculate a very good line for me here, maybe that would uh, give me a slight advantage because he would either have to go and get bogged down in the complications or play something inaccurate. So I looked at this position for a very, very long time, and it's a curious thing with me, perhaps with some of you as well. When you're playing off instinct, when you only spend a minute or two to just double check there's no tactical menaces, you generally play the best moves or moves that are good. The thing is, when I think for a very long time, I end up not always, but sometimes convincing myself a line is good because I've been staring at it a long time, so it must be an intuitive idea. And I eventually do convince myself it's the right move. I play it, and then afterwards I see it's terrible. And this is unfortunately what happened here. First I take, which is correct. Knight takes, and before I show you the move I played, which was terrible, I had been analysing the correct move. Bishop takes knight. So in the English, normally you want to keep the light squared bishop, and you want to keep this pawn structure sort of like this, where black has doubled c pawns. And I'm disobeying both of those rules that are thematic, and I'm playing entirely based off my own intuition and the actual exact nuance of the position. And here I was correct. So my first instinct when I saw this move was, oh, okay, I'll play this. But then I thought I wanted to win this game, and this probably is drawn. And also my opponent is rated more than 20 points below me and about 40 points lower than my performance over the season. So I was rather desperate to win. And I mostly disregarded the line because I was biased. I felt that if he was rated 200, I'd have done this move, this line, almost instantly. But I think I was rather too certain of my ability to try and win. In this line here, I think it's drawn because f5, so I've got control of the centre. My knight is blockading, so it's much better than his bad bishop. And I feel that I could easily restrain his pawn majority because of my knight that is blockading. So a potential line that I played against my 2900 rated computer validates this opinion. f6 check, and now his king is badly placed because the rooks aren't coordinated, and that gives me enough time to basically set up a blockade on the dark squares. So just to be brief, because you don't want to sit here all day looking at a very boring position, I can blockade with my pawns. I make sure that there was either no breakthrough or nothing that black could take advantage of. Now the king side is done, so I just need to blockade the queen side. And take advantage of a few little things in the position. And here, unless black is desperate to not draw, I can play a3 next move and draw. If black plays a3, I will just shuffle the rook around, and black's only chance to build up is play c3 and sack the pawn. And here, I think actually white might be a little bit better if black was so inclined to play this way. So I think here is probably drawn, if not white's a little bit better due to the past f-pawn. So anyway, I could have got that position very easily and we'd have agreed a draw fairly early on in the night and could have just gone home. But here I saw this line that was drawing, and that perhaps even perhaps white can improve upon, but I'm not sure how I can because I'm not a grandmaster. So the move I finally ended up playing was f5, with the idea of pawn storming the black king. And I saw the move that he was going to play, knight e3, forking the two rooks. So I'm giving up the exchange. And unfortunately, I had completely miscalculated based on counting out the moves. I thought I had an extra tempo with e6, knight takes d1, I take the bishop, and for some reason I thought that uh, black, it was white's move here, so I thought I could take the knight, but actually, after he played knight e3, I saw that black can take the pawn. I can keep the pawn on d7 temporarily, which on its own might be enough to sack the exchange for, but then black has knight d3 and could then play knight to e5 and capture the pawn on d7 very easily. And this would be completely lost for white. So, unfortunately, after knight e3, I am content with trying to force another line. I play f6 check. And here, I'd hoped that he would take opening up the e-file for me, where perhaps I can create something. But no, he plays king e8, safe move. Rook d to e1, so I'm trying to push e6 now to try and open things up, and maybe I can get compensation. Nope. No, that's not the case. I have to take the knight back, so I take it with the bishop and threaten c4. And I thought if he played b5, I could play bishop g2 and maybe target the c6 pawn. But the other line that's interesting, he did not play this, is bishop h3, which does force a trade. And I had originally thought that bishop takes bishop, rook takes knight would leave black completely winning. But I had quite a nice Zwischenzug here with knight takes c6. And if black takes my bishop, I can take the rook and I'll have won back the exchange. And I might even be a little bit better. So if he takes back, I will take the bishop. So I've won a pawn. And now we're equal on material, and black's pawn structure is pretty bad. However, he does have the exchange. So I was more optimistic about this position, but I still thought black was winning. And this is not totally unlike the position we get. Instead of bishop h3, he instead played bishop e6. And that bishop could head to d5, where it will be controlling the center. So I take it, because knights generally I think they generally get worse the longer the game goes on and the more the position gets opened up, which black will very easily be able to do. So I'll get rid of his bishop, which is quite useful, and get rid of my bad knight, and capture the pawn. So here we're equal on material, and if black could castle, then, then that would be quite a funny move. Not a very good one, though. He plays king f7, that's quite reasonable. I take on g7, so I'm hoping he'll play king takes g7, and then I can get the e6 pawn. Already, have a look at what I'm doing. I am trading pawns a lot, which is key when you're down on, let's say, down a piece or down the exchange. If you can trade off all the pawns and keep everything else equal, then it will be practically impossible for them to win. So if they're a piece up and you trade off all the pawns, a king and a piece versus king is a draw. And if they're the exchange up, that's almost never enough to win outright. There are only a couple of key positions where they can win with only a rook against bishop on the board. So I'm just trying to deny black the chance to push a pawn up the board and promote it, or get me to sack my bishop for it. He plays rook h e8 though, defending the e6 pawn. So I now do the next part of my plan, which is activate pieces. Even when you're worse, when you're losing, or when you're winning, don't sit back, don't be passive. Make your pieces active, threaten things. That's the only way to either force concessions, force mistakes, or be active enough to create tactics or saving resources. So I play rook f1, check. I'm losing the g7 pawn anyway. King takes g7. Now rook f6. So I've got the rook very, very active. Bishop active, they're attacking the e6 pawn. So again, I'm combining active pieces with trading pawns. I don't care if my e-pawn vanishes, as long as his e-pawn vanishes and doesn't become a strong passed pawn. Rook e7. And now I don't want to trade rooks, because if I do that, then there are enough pawns on the board that his rook should be able to outmaneuver my bishop and win the game. I want to keep my rook on the board. So I'm still avoiding exchanges when down in material, but only exchanges of pieces. Bishop takes, rook d e8. So now, where do I put my bishop? Do I put it on the c8 to h3 diagonal, or the a2 to g8 diagonal? Well, again, it's active pieces, so I put it on the latter, because if rook takes pawn, I have rook f7 check, putting my rook on the 7th and winning another pawn. So b5, bishop b3. Okay, that's fine, I don't mind. And after the game, I had originally been afraid of c5, and a player on their team, Alistair Hill, who's I think about 200 ECF, I'll have to check, suggested c5, and I was quite pleased that my analysis was similar to his, in that black doesn't need to take the pawn immediately on e5. He can avoid trading pawns, and that would allow him to have better chances of winning. So I think rook a6, c4, bishop c2, rook takes, and he's already managed to negate my advantage. So here black can force a trade, because if I move the rook away, he has rook e1 check, king moves up, rook e2 check, winning the bishop. And now things are quite easy. Black can eventually win. So I'm just going to briefly show the line I've worked out with the computer, where I was playing as black and the computer was playing as white. So I've managed to win the pawn and get everything level if I was black. And all the rook has to do is just make sure that white doesn't trade the last set of pawns and keeps the white king away. So h5 stops any white pushing the pawn up, and g4 doesn't quite work in this position. What's the reason? There's a reason for it, I've temporarily forgotten. Oh yeah, king e5. If g4, king e5, and then the bishop can't really move anywhere. So if bishop f5, then king f4. So just to show briefly, g4, king e5, bishop f5, king f4. And white can't take the pawn, and black's next move will be h takes g4. There we go, I remembered it. So eventually black will be able to win the pawns, again safeguarding his own pawn, and then it's just technique. It's winning with the passed pawn. So again, that's rather a long line, I admit, but the principle is the thing that's important. If black can trade off rooks and also keep the pawns sort of fluid, flexible, and dangerous in that they're quite far advanced, and also avoid uh, keeping at least one or two pawns on the board, then he'll be able to win if it's just rook against bishop. It's harder when it's two rooks against rook and bishop because there are some defensive resources. But c5 I think, was the move. Instead, he took my pawn, and I then took on c6. The reason I don't play rook f7 is that I was a bit worried about him playing c5 and c4, which would make my bishop more passive. My bishop was more aggressive on the b3 to g8 diagonal. So here a5 was played, just to make sure I don't have any rook c7s. And here I play h4. So if you look at this position, I can't really avoid having my pawns taken. And also, my opponent was down on time. I had about 22 minutes. He had 5. And again, it's 15-second increment. So he'll have enough not to lose on time, but it does sometimes lead to errors. And I thought here that if I play king g2, he has rook e2 check, which is an easy move to see over the board. I'll move the king to h3, and then rook takes b2, and he could then put the rook on e8 to e2 and attack the h2 pawn. So my idea was to play h4 and hope he didn't see the move rook e2, which is very strong here. A move that's not as good is checking me first, and my king moves. Rook check, king h3, taking, because even though you've done it with tempo, the white king is now more active and can help out in advancing the pawns. So here I wouldn't be so annoyed at having this position. Black is still definitely ahead and should win, but it can be slightly difficult. And also black could make a mating net by playing h5 and then rook 5 to e2. So I would obviously prefer black in this position, but I've got a very slight chance of counterplay if I could find a way of either pushing my kingside pawns or somehow getting rid of the two queenside pawns. So the move, though, that he did not play, but was, I think, much, much stronger, was rook e2, cutting off my king from the kingside pawns, rook c7, and now offering the trade. Again, not a good idea. Rook c5 takes. Now king f1, because rook e1 mate was being threatened. And here, black can just improve his rooks by doubling. He's keeping the queenside pawns on the board. He's not trading them. And here, I think I'm dead lost after rook takes pawn and then rook e to c2. I can't really see how I prevent mate on c1, to be honest. So I can prevent it by losing my bishop after rook f7 check, king e5. But after I play rook e7 check and could then defend with rook e1, he'll take my bishop. So I have unfortunately lost in that position. Perhaps not the easiest thing to see over the board, but it's a very principled move. So after h4, yeah, rook e2 should, if not completely win, then it'll be winning for black. It might take a bit of time, but black should win. So instead he played rook d8, I think with the idea of playing rook d2 and then rook e1 mate. However, this allows me to play rook c7 check. Now he can't block with the rook. King h8, defending his pawn. King f2, so I have no intention of allowing him to mate me on the back rank. I'm trying to get the king active. And I was expecting rook d2 check. Then the king would move up and rook takes b2. And I might then try playing king f4 and then g4, g5, and I don't know, trying to find a mate or push the pawn up enough that black might have to sack his rook for the bishop at some point. However, a4 was played first, which allows me to move the bishop to c2. So even though it looks passive, now it's attacking h7, and it's, in a way, it's defending b2 because rook d2 will no longer be attacking my pawn. So that's actually a move that strengthens my position. And his a4 pawn is now a target because it's on a light square. So rook f8 check, king g2. I don't want to go on the back rank. I have no intention of, again, being mated or cut off. h5. Okay, he's defending the pawn, but bishop g6. So the thing is, I don't check him first because that would allow his king to move out the way, and then perhaps he could take advantage of my bishop being forced to defend the rook. So I'm putting the check in reserve, and I'm attacking his pawn first with the bishop. Rook e2 check. And now again, don't go on the back rank, don't make your king a passive king, make him an active king. King h3. Rook takes b2, and now I want to keep my bishop, again, my bishop needs to be active and needs to be more centralized. So bishop takes h5 is a bit too hasty, and it's not that good a move. So what I do instead is I swing the rook around with rook h7 check, king g8, rook takes h5. So again, I'm creating a threat. Rook takes b5 is playable if he takes on a2. I think he probably should have done. And then what I might be forced to do is sacrifice my bishop for his last pawn, and then try and save the position by playing rook g5, and then keeping his king out the way. Perhaps, given that he's very low on time, maybe I could try drawing with a rook and two pawns against two rooks. But he played king g7 first, and I set up a little trap with rook g5. So now, can you see why rook takes a2 is a terrible move? Yeah, bishop b1 check would win the rook. And here, he only had about 2 minutes left, but I don't think that excuses his terrible move here. He played king h6. Why? You want to get the king active. Active king. You know, if you play king f6, that's much, much better. Because, okay, I have a skewer with rook f5, but then he could play king e7. And I'd have to move the rook away. I don't want to exchange rooks in that position. So, again, activity is what's needed. With king h6, that allows me to keep his king at the edge of the board and try and maneuver about with my pieces. So I played bishop d3, going for rook g6 check, and then maybe I could have a discovered check somewhere. So, for example, rook takes a2, I would have rook check, king h7, rook a6 check, king g7, bishop takes pawn. And this is, again, this is winning for black, but it's very hard to win, and perhaps I do have drawing chances because of his being low on time and it being a very tricky position. So, very briefly, a possible line on the computer is something like this, where I could set the trap of, if rook takes g3, I have king h6, which is mating. It's quite pretty, actually. The black king is stuck on h8 and has nowhere to go. And I'm threatening rook h7 mate and rook a8 mate. But but he can always avoid that and win a pawn. And again, yeah, black should win, but it is tricky to win this sort of position. So going back to the game, it's very nearly over actually. Yeah, so here, after bishop d3, he played rook f6 to avoid rook g6 and subsequent checks. And now he only had about a minute left on his clock, so I do not know why he played what he did. I saw I had a way of drawing with the move rook takes b5, and I also played rook b5 for another reason as well. There is a trap here which he fell into. What would you play as black if I had 20 minutes left and you only had about a minute on your clock? Well, I would play as black. I would take the rook without even thinking. It's going to be incredibly hard to win this. I don't think I can win it if I take the a2 pawn, just on a cursory glance. And, also it's with a 15-second increment. It's not like a 30-second increment where you can build up a good time advantage again, or just having enough time to think. It's very, very tricky. And here I would just take the rook, bishop takes, and then after a3, bishop c4, white should easily draw by getting the king moderately active and just shuffling the bishop along the diagonal, protecting the a2 pawn. And black should be able to avoid losing by playing, say, rook f2, keeping the rook on a second rank and attacking the pawns from behind. So this is very simple to play. However, he played rook takes a2, which not only is bad because of your time disadvantage, where you're keeping the position complicated, and white still is probably drawing, but I played rook takes b5 to set a trap, and he had fallen right into it. There's actually a move that wins for me. Can you see what it is? Well, this is why having 20 minutes on the clock in this sort of endgame is very useful. You can see all these traps and things in your analysis. The move is rook b7, and again, see what happens when his king's on the edge of the board like that. I've managed to create a mating threat with rook h7 mate. And how do you prevent it other than playing rook h2 check? He tried playing the move rook g6. So now, if I take the rook, king takes, rook a7. Again, this is technically winning for white, I believe, anyway. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was drawn, because this is going to be so hard to win. So, I don't know, this is very, very tricky, at least in my opinion, anyway. And it might be another 30 moves before I can win this. So I didn't want to win that slowly, I wanted to win immediately. So I followed up with the move g4, which I think is a very nice move. It is now threatening g5 check, which is absolutely horrible. And just for fun, the computer suggests the move rook g2. That's how bad it is for black. Rook g2, putting both rooks on prise. So the computer line is just hilarious because I immediately go so far up in material that now I could put 3 rooks on the board if I wanted to replace his 2 missing rooks. So I'll have 3 white rooks through promotions and then checkmate him that way, because I have morbid sense of humour. So, rook g2 wasn't played. He tried rook a3, pinning my bishop. And if I play rook d7, things are roughly even, but I don't want things to be even, I want to win. So I played the move g5 check. And he was down to a couple of seconds, and he sportingly allowed me to checkmate him. If king h5, I have rook h7 check, rook h6, and then rook takes rook mate. Instead, he took the pawn, and if I take, then it's a drawn endgame, but rook h7 is much better, checkmate. So I managed to win this game. So for the third time, I was completely losing, but managed to win in the end game against this player. He must be getting very annoyed with having to play me. But I think the key sort of interesting part of this game and the learning experience for me was after this rather disastrous position here, basically we have two plans. Black's plan is to get the rooks active, get the king not inactive, keep it fairly active, fairly mobile, and to avoid pawn exchanges. White's plan is to get the bishop and rook active, get the king active as well, and try and exchange all the pawns. And I feel that I do that quite effectively, while black had many, many ways to improve. So the first one was c5, which he didn't do. Okay, not a disaster. There's still 3 pawns for black. If he can keep at least one while not losing any more pawns, then not allowing me to increase my lead in pawns, then he should be okay. But here he missed the rook e2 move, which would cut off my king, allowing me to now get my king active. So already he's not played this very well. Then he puts my bishop onto a better diagonal, rather than just take the pawn on b2 and try and just win based on material. Okay, h5 is not a bad move. It does prevent my pawns becoming more active. And he could win back the pawn. So, okay, not a disaster here. But now he can't afford to lose any more pawns. He has to make sure I don't just take them all off. So again, and I think the final mistake of the game was, well, penultimate mistake, was king h6. Again, as I said previously, what are you doing? Why are you putting the king on such a bad square? Put the king in the center. There are so few pieces left that having the king in front of my pawns is not the most vital thing. It's having an active king. So at this point, I think I was fine. I mean, b4 is probably the most challenging move. Rook takes a2 is okay, and black can still win because he has one pawn left. But it is more tricky as I have 2 pawns. So okay, that's just about tenable for black to win, but very hard to win because I've succeeded in exchanging off all these pawns. Rook f6, okay, all right. Now it's drawn after rook takes b5. Because again, he's not managed to keep my advantage of only having 1 pawn extra. He's not kept it that way. Now I'm 2 pawns up. So taking off rooks is the move, and yeah, it's probably drawn. There's also rook d2, which might be playable as well, but I'd have bishop b1. So, okay, there might be more than one move that draws for black, if I'm being fair, not just rook takes rook, but here he had to see that because of his king being so terrible, the pawns don't matter anymore so much, other than to enable to checkmate. It's the fact that his king is not active, and okay, you could argue my king's on the edge of the board too, but it's behind my own pawns, it's being shielded, and it's supporting the pawns as well. And, where else could it be? His king either needs to be on some were on the king's side, but able to move around a bit, and that way it could help out stop the pawns, but not right on the edge of the board like that. It's so restricted in squares. It only has one square it can move to now, and then I cut it down to only one, well, a different one square it can move to, and then as you saw, it's lost, utterly lost. And my piece is coordinated very, very well and checkmated. So I hope you like this video. I certainly enjoyed playing this game. It was a roller coaster ride. And comment, like, subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.